Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Pakistan, Army's top brass says India's ceasefire violations along LOC and human rights abuses in Kashmir are a cause of concern for regional peace. Presiding over the meeting, Army Chief General Javed Bajwa said Pakistan's interests against hybrid warfare must be protected. He called for enhancing the combat readiness level of the troops in the wake of the evolving regional environment. The forum also deliberated on the evolving situation in Afghanistan with its impact on Pakistan's security dynamics. The Pakistan Army says a soldier has been martyred in unprovoked Indian fighting in the Bidodi sector along the line of control. In a statement, the military's media wing said the army effectively responded to Indian aggression and inflicted heavy losses on the Indian side. Earlier, the military shot down an Indian spying quadcopter after it violated Pakistan's airspace along the line of control. The military's media wing said this is the 11th Indian quadcopter shot down by Pakistan Army this year. Palestine's Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki says Arab countries must reject the UAE Israel deal to normalize their relations. Speaking at a virtual meeting of the Arab League, he said the deal has undermined the position of Arab states on the Palestinian cause. Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister said the kingdom supports the establishment of a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The United States has decided to withdraw around 2,200 troops from Iraq this month. This would reduce the number of U.S. troops in Iraq to 3,000. The head of the U.S. Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, said they will continue to assist Iraqi forces in rooting out ISIS militants. India's coronavirus cases have jumped to nearly 4.4 million, with almost 90,000 people tested positive, while over 1,100 died overnight. In Pakistan, 9 people have lost their lives to the virus overnight, taking the death toll to 6,359, with more than 299,000 cases. Globally, the virus has claimed over 898,000 lives, while infecting over 27.5 million. Meanwhile, leading pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca has halted the last stage trial of its vaccine after an unexplained illness in a study participant. Those were the headlines and detailed stories. Right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Pakistan, Army's top brass says India's ceasefire violations along the LOC and human rights abuses in Kashmir are a cause of concern for regional peace. Presiding over the meeting, Army Chief General Javed Bajwa said Pakistan's interests against hybrid warfare must be protected. He said the forces are combat ready to thwart any aggression in the wake of evolving strategic and regional developments. The forum also deliberated on the evolving situation in Afghanistan with its impact on Pakistan's security dynamics. It also expressed satisfaction over the improved security situation in the country. The Pakistan Army says a soldier has been martyred in unprovoked Indian fighting in the Bidodi sector along the line of control. In a statement, the military's media wing said the army effectively responded to Indian aggression and inflicted heavy losses on the Indian side. Earlier, the Pakistan Army shot down an Indian spying quadcopter after it violated the airspace in the Chakoti sector along the line of control. The military's media wing said the drone intruded 500 meters into the Pakistan's side of the line of control. This is the 11th Indian quadcopter shot down by the Pakistan Army this year. The Indian forces have committed over 2,100 ceasefire violations this year. Palestine's Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki says Arab countries must reject a UAE Israel deal to normalize their relations. Speaking at a virtual ministerial meeting of the Arab League, he said the deal has undermined the position of Arab states on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister called for the establishment of a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Faisal bin Farhan As-Saud says Saudi Arabia supports all efforts to reach a comprehensive solution to the dispute. Last month, the UAE and Israel announced that they will open embassies in each other's territory. The UAE brokered agreement sparked a criticism from several Muslim states, including Turkey and Iran. Palestine denounced the deal as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause, but Washington says more Arab countries will recognize Israel soon. US President Donald Trump has been nominated for the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize just weeks after brokering a peace deal between Israel and the UAE. In his nomination letter, Norway's lawmaker Christian Tybring-Gjedde praised Trump's efforts for resolving conflicts worldwide. Norway's lawmaker Christian Tybring-Gjedde said Trump meets the three conditions needed to win the Peace Prize. He said Trump stimulated fellowship among nations through dialogue, reduced the standing armies, and promoted peace congresses. Tybring-Gjedde said the historic Israel-UAE agreement can turn the Middle East into a region of cooperation and prosperity. Four of the US presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Jimmy Carter, and Barack Obama, have won the Nobel Peace Prize so far. The 2021 winner will not be announced until October next year. The Arab coalition fighting in Yemen says it has downed an explosive-laden drone over the Aba airport in Saudi Arabia's Asir province. State media said the drone was aimed at civilians in the kingdom's southern area before being shot down. Claiming responsibility, Houthi spokesman Yahya Sarraj said their drones targeted Saudi military and sensitive objects in the airport. The Saudi-led coalition has been at war with the Houthi rebels who ousted the Yemeni government in Sana'a in 2015. The United States has decided to withdraw around 2,200 troops from Iraq this month. This would reduce the number of U.S. troops in Iraq to 3,000. The head of the U.S. Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, said they will continue to assist Iraqi forces in rooting out ISIS militants. The move is part of U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to pull all troops out of Iraq as soon as possible. In January, Iraq's parliament passed a resolution demanding the complete withdrawal of the U.S. troops following the murder of Iran's General Qasem Soleimani. At least 37 million people have been displaced by the U.S. war on terror that began at the start of this century. A report by the Costs of War Project says the estimate is conservative and the real total could be far higher. This report has more.
Brown University's Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs estimates that between 48 and 59 million people were displaced by the U.S. global war on terror. The report focuses on 8 conflict zones including Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and the Philippines. The report says in Pakistan, some 3.7 million people were displaced, while about 5.3 million people were uprooted in Afghanistan. It says Libya saw at least 1.2 million displacements in what the IDMC called a state collapse triggered mass displacement. Iraq has the largest number, with 9.2 million people displaced by several wars, with the data only focused on just 5 provinces. In Somalia, some 4.2 million were forced to move, and Yemen recorded 4.4 million displacements as a result of direct U.S. operations. The Philippines, the only Southeast Asian country on the list, saw 1.7 million people forced to migrate internally. The report says although 25.3 million people have returned, that does not erase the trauma of displacement.
Pakistan says the UN Human Rights Office has documented a worsening situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir in the last 1 year. In a series of tweets, a Pakistani mission to the United Nations said an OIC contact group in Geneva briefed the UN Human Rights Commissioner on the latest situation in the occupied valley during an online meeting. It said the contact group urged the UN Commissioner to continue monitoring human rights violations in the territory. Last year, India illegally revoked the special status of occupied Kashmir in violation of the UN Security Council resolutions and imposed a curfew. Since then, Indian occupation troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris and arrested dozens of politicians. Pakistan and the UK have agreed to further strengthen bilateral cooperation in all areas of common interest. In a video teleconference, Foreign Secretary Suhail Mahmood and British Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth, Lord Tariq Ahmed, discussed bilateral cooperation, regional situation and multilateral issues including climate change and Commonwealth. Mahmood highlighted the grave situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. He said that there is a need for the international community to play its part for a peaceful resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. The Foreign Secretary also reiterated Pakistan's steadfast support for the Afghan peace process. The two sides appreciated their close collaboration that resulted in timely repatriation of stranded nationals due to COVID-19. Two members of the Myanmar's military have confessed to Rohingya genocide in the International Criminal Court. In a statement, the international rights group Fortified Rights said the two soldiers admitted to killing some 180 Muslims and burying them in mass graves. The troops said their senior commanders ordered them to kill all Rohingya Muslims in September 2017. The soldiers have provided the names of 17 direct perpetrators from the army, including a lieutenant colonel, a colonel and 3 captains. They claimed these officials ordered or contributed to atrocities against Rohingya in the Rakhine state. Fortified Rights said this is the first time ever that perpetrators from Myanmar could be tried at the ICC. The group said these two soldiers may become insider witnesses. 11 people have died and many others are missing after a ferry capsized following a collision with a sand-laden vessel in Bangladesh's Gumai River. The district administrator of Netrokona said the boat was carrying around 40 passengers. He said the dead include 5 children and 3 women. The administrator said the rescue operation is still underway. Hundreds of people die each year in ferry accidents in Bangladesh. Afghanistan's first Vice President Amarullah Saleh has narrowly dodged death after his convoy was bombed in the capital Kabul. In a statement, his spokesman said Afghanistan's enemy once again tried to harm Saleh but failed. He said Saleh was on his way to office when the explosion occurred in the Tiamani area of the capital. Police say 10 people were killed and 16 others wounded in the attack. No group has yet claimed the responsibility. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. India's coronavirus cases have jumped to nearly 4.4 million as almost 90,000 people tested positive, while more than 1,100 died overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed over 898,000 lives, while infecting over 27.4 million. More in this report.
Hopes of battling the COVID-19 monster anytime soon have been dampened, at least for the western part of the globe. Leading vaccine candidate of the West, AstraZeneca has suspended its phase 3 trials after a volunteer fell ill. But the company says this does not mean the vaccine is off the table. While President Donald Trump promises Americans a cure sooner than they think, the second wave of the virus continues to wreak havoc in India while the country slips deeper into economic strife. Criticism of Prime Minister Narendra Modi grows in the country as starvation pushes people to borrow at hefty interest rates from private lenders.
We lost all work, my husband and everyone else's husband as well. Modi shut down all the means of employment because of this disease, but he can't shut down the hunger, of course. So we took money from Praya's group and started carrying the earning responsibility of the family. My husband was a little unwell, so I had to work.
Greece has joined the list of European countries where the second wave of COVID-19 is now getting a foothold. Australia's sigh of relief over a decline in the cases has been short-lived as new infections spike once again in the lockdown state of Victoria. State's premier has been facing severe criticism over the extension of restrictions and arrests of those who have been violating them.
We'd all like to be open tomorrow, myself included. But to do that is not an act of leadership. That is to cave to some of the pressure that's there, to be driven by the anger instead of the epidemiology, to be driven by opinion instead of science and data and doctors.
South Korea's defiant churches are facing backlash for flouting retractions and becoming hotspots for cluster infections. Meanwhile, Egypt has lifted some travel restrictions and resumed flights to and from Moscow.
In Pakistan, 9 people have died from COVID-19, while 426 tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours. The health ministry says the country's death toll is at 6,359. The ministry said over 286,000 patients have recovered so far. It said the number of active cases has declined to 6,794. The ministry said the countrywide caseload is over 299,000. Sindh remains the most affected province with over 130,000 infections, while Punjab has reported more than 97,000 cases so far. Britain has published a bill that admits the government could break international law by ignoring some parts of Brexit deal. This raises concerns that the UK could leave the EU's single market in 4 months with no new agreement on trade. The British government said its proposals would break international law in a very specific and limited way. If approved, the bill will give lawmakers the power to ignore parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol of the withdrawal agreement. It will be subject to debate and approval by both chambers of the parliament before it becomes a law. Britain quit the EU in January but has remained part of the single market under a status quo agreement that expires in December. China says the US is trying to incite instability with proposed orders to block imports from the Xinjiang region over alleged human rights violations. At a press briefing, the Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said Washington has no right to intervene in China's internal affairs. Zhao said the decision is also a pretext to oppress Chinese customers. US Customs and Border Protection officials have prepared orders to block imports of cotton and tomato products from Xinjiang. The 10-Nation Association of Southeast Asian Nations summit has begun through a video link after being delayed due to the coronavirus pandemic. In his opening address, Vietnam's Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc said the virus continues to affect businesses. He said the regional geopolitical landscape is changing with growing volatilities endangering peace. The meeting will also focus on growing tensions surrounding the South China Sea. Russia says the alleged poisoning of opposition figure Alexei Navalny is being used to impose new sanctions on Moscow. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said Germany has been refusing to share its findings on Navalny's case with Moscow. The ministry said the disinformation campaign has nothing to do with Navalny's health. Earlier, the group of 7 foreign ministers demanded Russia to quickly find and prosecute those behind Navalny's suspected poisoning. Belarusian embattled President Alexander Lukashenko has hinted at fresh polls amid ongoing protests over the disputed election. In an interview, Lukashenko said he may have been in power for too long. However, he is ready to reform the constitution. Lukashenko refused to hold talks with the Opposition Coordination Council amid calls from the EU for a political dialogue. Meanwhile, the exiled opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has called for international sanctions against the Minsk regime. Virtually addressing the Council of Europe, Tikhanovskaya said the regime is violating international norms and human rights. At least 7,000 protesters have been arrested in demonstrations calling for Lukashenko's resignation after 26 years in power. British police have charged a man with 1 count of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Police arrested Zephaniah McLeod on suspicion of murder after the series of stabbings in the central city of Birmingham. In a statement, the Crown Prosecution Service said the man was charged after considering the evidence amid an ongoing investigation. The detective said the stabbings were not linked to terrorism. A man died after being stabbed on Sunday, while a man and a woman are hospitalized in a critical condition. In Lebanon, Hezbollah-allied Amal movement says it will not be swayed by the U.S. sanctions imposed on one of its members. In a statement, the party said the move was tantamount to targeting Lebanon and its sovereignty. The statement was issued after Washington added a senior Amal politician, Ali Hassan Khalil, to a blacklist. The party said the U.S. decision will not change party's convictions and national principles at all. Yesterday, the U.S. Treasury Department blacklisted two former Lebanese ministers over their alleged ties to Hezbollah. The U.S. move comes at a sensitive time as the new government is being formed in a bid to extricate Lebanon from a deep economic crisis. Fires have broken out at a refugee camp on Greece's island of Lesbos, forcing thousands to flee. The facility was placed under quarantine last week after 35 COVID-19 cases were reported in asylum seekers. There have been no reports of casualties. Officials say initial reports suggest fires broke out at different locations. A government spokesman says the cause of the arson is under investigation and a state of emergency will be declared across the island. The Moria facility has been frequently criticized by aid groups for poor living conditions. It hosts some 12,000 people, more than 4 times its capacity. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that humanity will be doomed if the world powers are not united to curb climate change. In an interview, Guterres said countries must retool their economies for a green future. He called for the nations to use the pandemic as a springboard to launch transformational measures to wean societies off fossil fuels. Guterres said the governments must invest in renewables and commit to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Record floods in Sudan have threatened sites housing the royal pyramids of Meroe and Nuri. The Interior Ministry says 102 people have died in the floods, while tens of thousands of houses have been destroyed. The rise in groundwater has jeopardized the country's archaeological site, some 350 kilometers from the capital Khartoum. Head of the museum's authority, Hatim Al-Nur, says teams have been working to protect the site from being swamped. The Nuri pyramids include the tomb of Tarhaka, who ruled over lands in modern-day Sudan and Egypt in the 7th century BC. Residents of the flooded area say they fear worse is yet to come. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Iran and Turkey have discussed ways to materialize $30 billion of trade exchanges earlier agreed by both sides. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says the two sides had productive discussions in 6th Iran-Turkey High-Level Cooperation Council meeting. Zarif said Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan co-chaired the council meeting virtually. He said the leaders discussed cooperation in the energy, transportation and tourism sectors. An official said the two sides also mulled over ways to help establish peace in Syria. He said other regional issues, including the Palestine cause and hostile behavior of some states, were also on the agenda. Wall Street stocks have climbed as tech shares clawed back some of the steep losses that pushed the Nasdaq Composite into correction territory. The shares of Tesla surged nearly 9% after shedding about a fifth of their value in the previous session. The stocks of Apple, Microsoft, Netflix and Amazon were also among the top boosters in Dow Jones Industrial Average Index, while the S&P 500 index traded over 2% higher. Meanwhile, oil prices reversed some losses, but demand concerns still persist. Ireland's Sam Bennett has won the 10th stage of the Tour de France. Bennett reclaimed the green jersey for the points classification from the triple world champion Peter Sagan. Australia's Caleb Ewan finished second, while Slovakia's Sagan finished third. Slovenia's Primož Roglic retained the overall leader's yellow jersey. He remains 21 seconds ahead of defending champion Egan Bernal. In the National Basketball Association, the Los Angeles Lakers beat Houston Rockets by 112 points to 102 in a playoff game at the NBA's Biosecure Bubble in Disney World. The Lakers will take a 2-1 lead into Game 4 of the best-of-7 series. Lakers' LeBron James hit 36 points and became the all-time leader in NBA post-season wins with his 162nd career playoff victory. Houston's shooting guard James Harden bagged 33 points, 9 rebounds and 9 assists, but scored just 2 points in the third quarter. Earlier, Milwaukee Bucks went crashing out as Miami Heat won 103-94 in Game 5 in their Eastern Conference semi-final series. Heat's Jimmy Butler scored 17 points, 10 rebounds and 6 assists at Bucks star Giannis Antetokounmpo missed the game with a sprained ankle. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.